good afternoon everyone, and thank you. I'm currently the Chief Executive Officer of Geoscience Australia, which is the national geoscience institution. My training was initially at the University of New South Wales and then at ANU, and I'm a country kid from New South Wales. The thing that really worked for me early in my career was having joined the organisation that I now lead as a graduate, I was seconded to Papua New Guinea last century as one of the scientists to take up a role in the Geological Survey of Papua New Guinea before independence, and had a lot of opportunity to see a lot of rock, see a lot of country, work very hard, fly around in helicopters, have the bejesus scared out of me. But what I was doing was working on a margin. The island of New Guinea is actually the deformed margin of the Australian continent. And one of the issues that I got involved in trying to understand was how does the continental margin form? So I started to get involved with boats, and the boats over time got bigger and bigger and bigger. I should say with this one I didn't try to immigrate. And then eventually got involved in one of the most successful geoscience programs on the planet, which is the Ocean Discovery Drilling Program, which is a fantastic, uses this great big drill ship and a range of others to explore the ocean and to collect samples and to enable us to understand that very vast part of our planet which we don't very readily find access to, that is the material under the ocean. But having got involved in all of that and then undertaking a PhD at ANU in marine science, not long after that I completed the PhD, I actually got involved in a leadership program in GA and moved into a senior role. And part of the reason for doing that was I realised that while I love the science, there are a lot of other people who could do the science as well as I could, if not better. What I could do was get them organised and get them the resources to do what they needed to do. Out of that, we were able to build the capability that led to this outcome. Australia's marine jurisdiction, which many of you will appreciate, is twice the size of the land jurisdiction. That's based on geological parameters, and the capability that we built in the division that I led provided the information that built that and made that successful claim. It was the first successful claim at the UN under the UN Law of the Sea. I also had an opportunity to rebuild groundwater capability in Geoscience Australia after we'd lost it, at a time when water was thought to be an agricultural issue only. It's probably the most significant issue that we will face as we go forward. With the growing population on this planet, some predictions saying it will be up to 11 billion people by the end of the century, fresh water is probably going to be the fundamental issue, and that's an area I'd like to be involved with in the Academy, amongst many others that I'll come to later. We built Australia's tsunami warning system after the Sumatran earthquake, and I had carriage of that particular practice. And in addition to that, at various stages, the organisation provides pre-competitive information to attract investment in both in the resources sector and both in petroleum and minerals. And we've been very successful in that enterprise. The ATSE field, which is being developed in the Northwest Shelf at the moment, which will ship its first gas out of Darwin fairly shortly, was started by us for a small investment of $2 million for a basin study that we then promoted into Japan. Impex came and invested in it. It's now a $34 billion project that will contribute something like 80 billion in royalties to the Australian economy over its lifetime. So we've been involved in some interesting things. Sorry, more photos. I also have an understanding, because of my role, of foundation spatial data information, and this is going to be fundamentally important as we go forward. Some of those two talks you've just seen around positioning that involved autonomous vehicles and so forth will be critically dependent on a positioning capability that will be derived from global navigation satellite systems. And where the staff I have at GA are building the next geodetic framework which will enable Australia to actually enable those vehicles to know where they are, as well as the vehicle-to-vehicle communication positioning will be fundamentally important. So I have an understanding of positioning in particular in these foundation spatial data sets. But as we say at GA, everything happens somewhere. And foundation spatial data is the context for everything that we do, and without that, nothing else makes a lot of sense. So I have a deep knowledge of that kind of capability. So what else have I got on here? Where can I help? So I have a lot of knowledge around the geology of this region, both Australia and its near neighbours. and the oceans. I know a lot about the resources, energy and mineral systems that operate in this country and the way they are tested, and they are going to have to undergo some fundamental changes. The current models for mining will not be acceptable into the future. Social licence to operate will ensure that you will not see massive giant open pits and the mess that our mining sector leaves now. That will have to change, and it will place great demands on the geoscience community to achieve a way to do that in an acceptable form. As I've mentioned, I know a lot about spatial information and would be happy to contribute in that space. I do actually know how government works. I have had some success. I was thinking about Cecile here in communication. I know someone she could probably coach, which would be helpful. I've had some success in raising funds to get a few things done, and I think it's important that we engage. And there's a whole range of issues there that I would like to contribute to. So the mineral resources, the social licence issues, how do we take that into a different space? Infrastructure issues, positioning is going to be fundamentally important. Everyone's mentioned STEM, I have to say I totally agree, and would be delighted to contribute if I can. I'm going to come to the gender issue in a moment, but there's one issue that I'd like to throw back to the academy. I think as a consequence, principally of the climate debate, science has lost its kudos in the community. I've been involved in a lot of discussions with stakeholders and members of Parliament around the coal seam gas issue. I present to them on the science of that issue, try and explain the risks, but what I find almost invariably is that people have already made up their minds and the facts actually don't matter anymore. We've got to find a way as a society to re-communicate with the society more generally and to connect with them and regain our status as trusted advisors, because I frankly think we've lost a bit of it. Enough of the sermon. So there's lots of spaces I'd like to contribute. Inclusiveness, particularly around gender. My organisation has utterly failed in this space, I have to say. We have not had a senior woman in our leadership team ever. We have one now in an acting capacity. I started a process several years ago now around inclusiveness, and this is some of the material that is on my email. It's around the building. It's part of a very long-term process to try and overcome the unconscious bias that unfortunately does exist in almost everywhere, and it's something I think we as a community have to tackle and have to be leaders in and continue to push. While many of my inductees, my fellow inductees have indicated today, we need to get this, we need to do better. Why would we simply not want to use all the intellectual capacity that's available to us regardless of how it's packaged? We have to keep working on the challenge. Thank you, Chair. That's all I have to contribute.